all this occurred. Cecil himself offered to go down there with me, but being in his mid-80s, I kind of didn't want to put Cecil through too much in terms of dragging him all the way from Queensland down to this location to check out these locations. And just out of shot, unfortunately, is local historian Ron Johansson, who also went to school with Cecil. Ron has written up a whole series of local history books about the area and included this account in one of his local histories in terms of some of the colourful history of the Tweed Valley. Okay, so what was it all about? To get to the next one, basically, to keep it fairly simple, and probably the best way to tell the story is let Cecil tell it himself, but in a nutshell, it seems as though the events occurred with the arrival of what appeared to be what you'd classically call a flying saucer, etc. He and his brothers saw this fly through the valley. First of all, his older brother was telling him it was a meteorite, but this meteorite turned corners and then also slowly settled on a nearby hillside. And next morning, he and his brother and a number of the locals were able to go to that hillside and found a classic sort of burnt circular area, the kind of thing that I often get involved with investigating today, a so-called UFO landing site, etc. And as an industrial chemist, it would have been nice to have even come onto that scene all this time, much later, because there are techniques that you can apply to it, but they weren't absolutely certain that the hillside has been tilled many times, bananas, mangoes, and all that kind of thing. So probably there wasn't that much point trying to locate it. But also there were a lot of sightings of agile nocturnal lights zigzagging, going behind hills, doing all sorts of crazy things in the sky. There were reports of strange sort of night noises, extensive disturbances in the livestock, the cattle. The cattle were just going berserk. Now these cattle were almost like pets. In fact, Dorothy, when his sister talked about the pets, she referred to them as pets. They were really gentle cattle. They were dairy herds, and they used to come in on their own accord for milking each day, etc. And during this particular period with these lights and unusual phenomena going on, they were literally just completely berserk. A couple of them were lost, killed when they sort of tried to escape it through barbed wire fences, and they were really obviously extremely disturbed and totally off their milk and all that kind of thing. And it was clear that something out of the ordinary seemed to be occurring, and in fact their own watchdogs that they had, which were really good watchdogs, etc., during the period of the week that this activity was going on, they all basically had disappeared. They couldn't find the dogs for a period of about a week during this whole event. So maybe the dogs knew something better than the people did anyway. But so there was that kind of thing going on. There were sort of unusual night noises going on, this sort of whoop, whoop, whoop noise, which in fact he found was associated with these big bird-like creatures. Now, the existence of these birds, they became aware of them fairly slowly. The first occurrence that seemed to be related to it was of a neighbour who was coming home late one night from P&C meeting, and he was walking along near a bush track near the McGann's property, and first of all, Mr. and Mrs. McGann became aware of screaming, somebody screaming in great distress down the bottom of the hill. And they went outside to see what was going on. It was this fellow rushing up the hill, screaming his head off, incoherently saying something had come out of the bushes at him. And this guy was so terrified that he'd been wearing galoshes, you know, these rubber boots, etc., because part of the track was a bit muddy. The galoshes got stuck in the mud, and one of the jobs that Cecil had as a 10-year-old was to go down the following morning to retrieve this guy's galoshes to give them back to him. And this fellow was apparently so frightened by what occurred to him that he left the area with his family fairly promptly within a couple of weeks of these events. So, and his parents wouldn't tell him what occurred there, and it was only later when he himself had an observation of one of these bird-like creatures that it was confirmed that this is what this local fellow had seen. But he had seen it at night time, lumbering out of the bushes, seemingly ambling towards him, something that of the order of about 5 to 6 feet tall, ambling out of the bushes and flapping its wings at him. So that's why he was a little frightened. And birds are big, but not quite that big. So that was one of the first events with this bird-like creature. And then the night noises. These night noises, Cecil started to hear them first because he used to sleep on a bed outside in the cool on one of these veranda-type situations. And these noises seemed to be going off in different directions, as if one would signal to the other, and then they'd get really close and get very, very loud, and to the point where Cecil got a bit frightened. First of all, his parents didn't believe him, and then when they started hearing it, his father seemed to react to it pretty intensely, in the sense that he decided best idea was to move Cecil into the bedroom with them, and for the first time they started to lock their doors, because this was fairly intimidating. And on one of the most intense nights where all this noise was going on, there was this very strong foul smell, as if one had a chook run. You know, you had that sort of bird-like smell. That was quite apparent, and then the next morning Cecil claims he found two large, very large, speckly feathers, which, if he still had them, but unfortunately with all the moves he's lost those long since then, but it would have been nice to have had those feathers for DNA work today, basically, but not to be. He had two clear observations, both in daylight, of these creatures. One where he was walking down with his older brother Des down a hill near the property, heard what sounded like cackling or weird sort of conversation, almost human-like, but unintelligible, coming from above. They look up and they see these two large bird-like creatures, very high, flying or seemingly just virtually gliding across the sky. And he described these as just huge birds, very, very large birds. And I sort of suggested, what about wedge-tailed eagle and things like this? And basically it was something much, much bigger than that. The other daylight sighting he had was going to school one morning. There was a dead tree within close proximity to the schoolhouse. He saw, and this is his drawing here at the top here, this thing perched in the fork of a dead tree, and that's where he got the clearest picture of it. It was sitting there like I guess an owl or a penguin would sit, like a very large-looking thing, and he approximated this to be about 5 feet tall. And as he walked, he kind of freaked a little bit and decided he'd better rush off to school and tell the teacher, so the teacher could come out and have a look at this. And as he walked past it, it seems its big owl-like eyes were sort of moving and just sort of staring at him, and that caused him to run a little bit faster, being only 10 years old, and then he rushed into the school and told the teacher. The teacher came out, the school came out, bird was no longer there, and of course the teacher dismissed this as an excuse for arriving at school late in the morning. Just, forget it, that's no good, that's not a good excuse. So that was the two main sightings that he had of the birds. And the other bizarre things that were going on included things like having a dairy herd and providing milk was part of the way they made money, but most of their money was tied up in fattening up a couple of pigs. They had 3 pigs that they were fattening up, which was one of their prime sources of money, in a pigsty that was built in like a 6-foot trough, and it was designed so that people could come in on the side, but the pigs inside couldn't get out because it was a 6-foot height in the sty, so there was no way the pigs could get out of their own accord, and there were 3 of them. And one particular night, with all this sort of night noise disturbances, etc., they found next morning that 2 of the pigs were left in this pigsty, dead with bite marks, puncture marks on their throats and loss of blood, and there was 1 pig missing. And pigs at the best, these were fairly well fattened, advanced age pigs basically, so we're not talking lightweight little piglets. To get a pig out of the sty like that was a major effort, and when they started trying to search to find this missing pig, eventually they found an area where the cows were milling around, really stirred up, and as if they were very agitated, and they were sort of milling around a circle, and when they went, they sort of cleared the cows to go into the circle. It was basically a circle of blood and pig hair, no flesh, basically just blood and pig hair. So whatever had taken the pigs was obviously fairly powerful and strong. There were other situations involved, the cattle and I think the cow being killed. So there were a whole range of episodes that really argued that something extremely strange was going on. And there were a number of other unusual events. At one point, a car drives onto the property, which was really quite strange. In those days, you've got to understand that in those days the Pacific Highway consisted of dirt, and in my files I've got a photograph of the future King and Queen of England visiting Murwillumbah, just down the road, in a sort of the royal convoy of cars, and these are the old cars, and they had to